History doesn't remember peace. It remembers the screams before it. You'd think the end of the world would come with noise, alarms, sirens, panicked broadcasts, something loud, something urgent. But no, it began with silence. Not the kind you get in a quiet room or on a still night. No, this silence was vast, cold, cosmic, the kind that creeps into your bones when the universe holds its breath. A silence so complete it made the hairs on your neck stand up, even though you didn't know why. Astronomers first noticed it. Little things, minor anomalies, spectrographs behaving strangely. The math didn't add up. Something was moving in the Oort cloud, out beyond Neptune, too fast and too precise. Natural objects don't move like that. Something was coming. They flagged it, passed it along. But the universe is a noisy place, and bureaucracies even more so. For a moment, it was just another line in a long report, just another distant whisper in space. Then Pluto vanished, not drifted out of orbit, not hit by an unseen asteroid. No, Pluto blinked out of existence. Satellites trained on it watched in real time as the dwarf planet collapsed into a point of white fire and was gone. One moment there, the next reduced to a rippling sphere of collapsing light and silence. No transmission, no warning, no demand, just deletion. Humanity stared into the black and realized something terrible. We were not alone, and whatever had found us wasn't here to talk. In that moment, before the headlines, before the chaos, before the cities emptied and the bunkers filled, the silence broke inside us. Not the quiet of space, but the hush that comes when an entire species understands, deep down, that the clock has started ticking. We had 7 days. 7 days between Pluto's erasure and the arrival of what we would later call the Vadrak. Even now, historians argue whether we ever stood a chance. But maybe that was never the point. Maybe it was never about winning. Maybe it was always about who we would become in those 7 days. At first, the world did what it always does, fumbled. Leaders pointed fingers. Networks looped satellite footage. Talk show hosts asked if it was real, if it was a hoax, if maybe it was just Pluto's time to go. But the scientists knew. They knew because the data didn't lie. Objects the size of skyscrapers were moving with intelligence, accelerating, changing course, communicating with each other in bursts of radiation so complex our best quantum systems couldn't decode them. Ships, warships, coming fast. The panic was not cinematic. It was quiet, a little too quiet. Flights grounded, power grids overloaded from emergency bunkers booting up. Cities began to dim, not with screams, but with the soft dread of people locking their doors, watching the sky. And in that silence, a new kind of fire lit in our species. We'd seen what they did to Pluto. We understood. So we did what humans do best. We adapted. We resisted. We got angry. In Washington, a disbanded space defense initiative was reactivated within hours. They called it Project Firewatch. Cold War bunkers that hadn't been touched in 50 years roared back to life. Computers still running on punch cards now interfaced with bleeding-edge AI. In Beijing, satellite clusters were reprogrammed into kinetic defense platforms. Rods of tungsten now pointed at the edge of the solar system. In Mumbai, engineers designed drone swarms so fast they could mimic flocks of birds. In Lagos, codebreakers worked around the clock trying to understand the Vadrak's electromagnetic chatter. In Berlin, artists began painting what they thought would be the last memories of Earth, scenes of sunsets, lovers, cities lit by neon. The world did not unite with a great speech or a single hero. That's not how these things work. It was messier, more human. People argued. Supplies were hoarded. Governments snapped at each other like frightened dogs. But in the cracks of that panic, something ancient stirred, something fierce. You could feel it on the streets, in the way strangers looked each other in the eye, in the way people left notes for their kids, their lovers, their neighbors. Stay safe. Be strong. If they come, fight. We didn't know who they were. We didn't know what they wanted. But deep down, we knew what we had to do. And then, on day 4, we saw them. The telescopes caught the first images. Black holes shaped like spears, trailing vapor and light. No windows, no visible propulsion, just mass and speed. Dozens of them, maybe more. Their trajectory was perfect. Not just accurate, perfect. They weren't correcting for gravity. They weren't avoiding debris. They were moving like they owned the system. The first transmissions hit Earth 2 hours later. Electromagnetic pulses so strong they fried hundreds of satellites. They weren't messages. They were signals of dominance, like the roar of a predator stepping into the den. That's when we gave them a name, Vajrak, from an old Sanskrit word meaning thunder from the sky. We didn't know what they looked like. We didn't know if they were machines or flesh, but we knew what they were here for. They called us contaminants. Day 6. The moon fractured. A low-orbit station recorded it. The moon lit up with a lattice of pulsing red beams, energy slicing through the regolith like a surgeon's scalpel. Then explosions, fire, silence. A third of the moon simply crumbled. The tidal forces hit Earth 6 minutes later, ocean swells rising across coasts like the breath of something old and angry. But even as the skies roiled and the winds howled, something else happened. We launched, not a retreat, not an escape, a fight. We launched satellites carrying electromagnetic flares meant to blind their sensors. We launched drones rigged with nuclear cores. We launched ourselves, hundreds of pilots in retrofitted orbital fighters, some of them barely held together with duct tape and prayer. And when one of those fighters, a relic from the Space Cold War era, collided with a Vajrak scout ship and broke it in half, humanity tasted something we hadn't felt since this all began: hope. In those final hours, the world didn't pray. We didn't beg. We sharpened our knives. Humanity stood on the edge of extinction, and instead of trembling, we raised our fists to the stars and screamed into the void. You want Earth? You'll have to take it from us. You'll have to burn every city, kill every child, extinguish every story. And even then, we will haunt you. So here we are, a species born in the mud, now howling through the vacuum of space with teeth bared and fire in our veins. They thought we would beg. They thought we would break. They thought wrong. This isn't the story of how we died. This is the story of what we became when the universe came to erase us. And it's only just beginning. The mountains will burn before we kneel. Commander Myra Salix, Martian 3rd Division. They came to Mars expecting another rock, another outpost, another quiet kill. They expected steel bunkers and terrified colonists. They expected humans hiding behind rock and code. They expected silence. What they found was Olympus Mons, burning, and above it, screaming like war angels in red dust and plasma trails. We waited. Mars wasn't supposed to be a battlefield. It was supposed to be the next step. Colonists had dreamed of domed cities, clean energy, families watching sunrises over ice cliffs. We terraformed just enough to walk outside for short bursts, if you didn't mind the wind scarring your lungs. But when Pluto died and the moon cracked, we knew they wouldn't skip Mars. It was in their path, and it was human. So we turned the dream into a weapon. We converted the atmospheric processors into fusion turbine traps, drained reservoirs to fuel jet-propelled minefields across the Tharsis Ridge. The colony cities were evacuated, at least the ones we had time for. The rest? We wired them to blow sky high. And then there was Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system, a shield of ash, frozen carbon, and forgotten tectonics. We turned it into Fortress Olympus, 7 rings of rail guns, drone towers, thermal-guided missile nests, and hand-dug trenches. We didn't build it to last. We built it to hurt. The Vajrak drop began at dusk. Not that dusk means much on Mars, just a deeper red, a longer shadow stretching across blood-colored sand. But still, it felt ominous, like something ancient watching from behind a curtain of wind. The first wave came fast, sleek, obsidian drop pods, hundreds of them, shaped like coffin nails. No engines, no heat signatures. They fell in silence. Then the ground trembled. One pod hit 3 kilometers from Olympus, and it was like Mars flinched. The shockwave shattered old lava tubes, sent boulders the size of tanks crashing down into the trench lines. Dust filled the air, turning day into bloodstained twilight. We'd barely recovered before they started climbing out. They weren't what we imagined. The Vajrak didn't march. They didn't shout. They didn't even seem alive, not in any way we recognized. They moved like liquid wrapped in bone, long-limbed, multi-jointed, skimming over rock and fire like spiders made of obsidian and glass. They didn't fire guns. They unraveled space. We watched men disintegrate, literally pulled apart, atoms unspooled like string. No sound, just a flicker of light, a distortion in the air, and gone. Our lines broke in minutes, but not everywhere. Commander Myra Salix wasn't born on Mars. She'd bled for it. Born in a refugee zone on Earth after the 3rd climate collapse. Grew up learning how to make food out of lichen and powder protein. Spent her teens in resistance camps in the Amazon reshield zone. fought off raiders, saw her brother take a bullet in the lungs at 15. When she joined the UN Frontier Corps, they didn't give her a uniform. They gave her a flamethrower and told her to hold the line. She didn't know how to retreat. And now, she was all that stood between the Vadrak and the Martian core colonies. She didn't give speeches. She didn't need to. She walked into the trenches, face wrapped in red dust, rifle slung over her back, eyes like cracked steel. And when a young recruit asked her what to do if he saw a Vadrak, she said, "Aim for center mass. Empty the mag. And if you live long enough to reload, you shoot again." That first night, we lost 40% of our defenses. But we learned. Our plasma rounds did little. They phased through the Vadrak's armor like mist. But ceramic shrapnel? That slowed them down. Railgun slugs heated to white fire? That hurt. And when we dropped the first thermobaric mine deep into a Vadrak cluster, watching their liquid armor boil and collapse in on itself like punctured lungs, we knew they weren't invincible. Just very, very hard to kill. So we adapted. Humans are very good at adapting. By day 3, Olympus Mons was a war god. The ash had thickened into a permanent blizzard. The sun hadn't touched the summit in 2 days. Every sunrise was firelight bouncing off craters and debris fields. We fought in tunnels, in dust storms, in collapsed mining shafts. The red soil turned black with oil, blood, and melted plating. Myra led every charge herself, shoulder to shoulder with rookies who could barely walk in their exosuits. She didn't sleep, didn't eat much, just moved like some relentless revenant through the Hell's Cape she'd helped create. Her armor was scarred, her voice was hoarse, but when the comms lit up with cries for help, she was already en route before the words, "Reinforcements requested," finished transmitting. They say she once jumped on a Vadrak drone that was dragging a corporal away into the mist, ripped open its neural casing with her bare hands, and stabbed it with a broken antenna. The corporal's name was Ellis. He still wears that antenna as a necklace. By day 5, it was no longer about holding the mountain. It was about denying it to the enemy. One by one, Myra began triggering collapse points, detonating the old lava tubes, causing avalanches of molten rock and dust storms that stripped skin off bone. She sacrificed the outer ring, then the second, then the third. Every time the Vadrak advanced, they paid in blood and fire. We flooded valleys with oxygen to create combustion zones. We rigged geothermal vents to explode like volcanic grenades. Every inch they took, they earned it with screams. And in the chaos, something started to shift. The Vadrak slowed, not because they feared us. They didn't even understand fear. But because, for the first time, they were meeting resistance they hadn't accounted for. We weren't supposed to fight like this. Not with madness. Not with fury. Not with broken glass and sheer, suicidal rage. They were a perfect machine, and we were the wrench in their gears. Day 7. The final ring of Olympus burned. The sky was black with smoke and falling wreckage. Railgun batteries fired until they melted. Drones fell from the air, hacking the Vadrak with their own EMP pulses. Everything we had, we used. And then we used more. Myra's last command came from the summit. Her comms flickered, static. Then her voice, soft but fierce. "This mountain stands. If I don't walk out, burn the rest." She went down into the final trench with a pack of volunteers, engineers, medics, cooks, anyone who could hold a weapon. No one saw her again. When the satellite footage cleared the next morning, Olympus Mons was gone. A crater, a scorched ring of slag and shattered metal. The Vadrak retreated, not far, not forever, but they left. And for the first time since this war began, we had taken something back. They say Mars still burns in places. They say if you walk near Olympus' shadow, you can still smell the fire in the air. And some say on quiet nights, you can hear Myra's voice whisper through the dust. They wanted ash. We gave them flame. We named the ships after the cities they erased. You have to understand, Earth didn't always fight from strength. For most of this war, we fought with what we had, not what we needed. The Vadrak came with precision, elegance, machines grown from stars. We came with rage, duct tape, and dreams wrapped in steel. They had fleets designed over millennia. We had scrapyards. But from those broken bones, we built an armada, not a navy, not a fleet. No, this was something else. This was a funeral procession with guns. The Gravestone Armada wasn't born in a lab or command center. It was born in desperation, in welding bays lit by grief, in the dark, oil-slicked halls of orbital junkyards, in silence and sorrow, beneath a banner not of conquest, but remembrance. Each ship bore the name of a city we'd lost. The Manhattan, its hull built from the melted superstructure of the East Coast megalink. The Tokyo, patched together with ceramic plating once used to shield fusion cores. The Lagos, stripped down, rearmed, and roaring with jury-rigged Gauss cannons. The Damascus, held together with prayers and plasma welds. They were ugly. Some looked like floating coffins, others like space-faring tumors. But when they fired, when they moved, they sang a song made from the rusted voice of resistance. They didn't need to be pretty. They needed to hurt. The architects of this armada weren't admirals. They were civilians, mechanics, coders, disgraced physicists working out of abandoned moon bases, retired engineers brought back because they remembered how to make older systems work without AI. The Vadrak's weapons had torn through modern Earth tech like wet paper, so we went backwards. Analog systems, magnetically fired projectiles, hardwired circuits. We raided museums for blueprints, reactivated ships no one had flown since the early interplanetary age. We turned history into warships, and in doing so, we turned the past into a weapon. Command fell to a man who had no business wearing a uniform. Admiral Juno Reyes, former asteroid miner, lost a leg in the belt collapse, came back bitter, quiet, addicted to silence and synthetic whiskey. They found him living in a collapsed mining rig on Phobos. They offered him a clean bed, a ship, a chance to fight. He laughed for a long time, then said 4 words: "Let's bury the bastards." He took command of the Manhattan, and from that moment on, the Gravestone Armada had a soul. The Vadrak had their next advance planned with the usual elegance. 6 cruisers slipping past Jupiter's orbit, aiming for Saturn's moon colonies. Clean, surgical, meant to end our last foothold beyond Earth. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that we were waiting. The Gravestone Armada didn't wait at Saturn. They met the Vadrak halfway, in the black between worlds, where no light shines, where silence lives and the stars feel cold and very far away. That's where we showed them what humans do when the light runs out. The battle lasted 48 hours. We didn't just fight, we brawled. The Lagos opened with a full barrage of kinetic rods, steel bars fired at relativistic speeds, slamming into Vadrak shielding hard enough to make reality stutter. The Damascus lost power 20 minutes in, but rammed a Vadrak escort at full burn, igniting its fusion core on impact. The explosion was so bright it lit up Saturn's rings from 20 million miles away. We fought blind, with broken comms and hulls venting fire. We rewired laser arrays mid-battle. Pilots ejected into space and hot-wired escape pods into suicide drones. There was no strategy, only fury. The most famous moment came from a man named Yuri Trentov. He wasn't a soldier. He was a tugboat captain, used to move cargo between orbiting platforms, grew up singing Russian folk songs and fixing magnetic clamps with his grandfather. When his ship, the Sochi, lost its navigation system, Yuri locked the controls and aimed straight for the Vadrak's command ship. No weapons, no shields, just one man, strapped to a chair, whispering a lullaby to a picture of his wife as he plowed into a vessel the size of a skyscraper. His last transmission? "Tell them Earth says hello." Then static, then fire. The Vadrak retreated, not because they feared us, because they didn't understand us. We didn't act like a species trying to survive. We acted like one already dead, swinging in spite, in memory, in rage. We didn't ask for surrender. We didn't call for peace. We showed them a truth they had never faced, that sometimes, when humans build weapons, they do it out of grief. And grief is stronger than fear. The aftermath was brutal. The Manhattan limped back to lunar orbit with one engine barely functional. Only 19 ships out of 48 survived. Reyes lost an arm. For ships were never found, just fragments drifting through the dark like ghosts. But for the first time since this war began, we'd pushed them back, not because we were stronger, but because we refused to be erased. The Gravestone Armada became legend, not because of victory, because of meaning. Each ship bore names etched into their hulls, lists of the dead, laser burned into steel, cities, families, songs, memories, graffiti and prayers, smeared in oil and hope. They weren't warships. They were monuments that fought back. Children born after that battle don't remember what we lost. They remember what we did. They remember Yuri's last words. They remember Reyes standing on the cracked deck of the Manhattan, looking into the void and saying, "Let them come. We've got more names." And the universe? The universe finally took notice, because that's the thing about humanity. We don't go quietly. We go screaming, and we carve our grief into stars. They offered surrender. Our machines declined. There's a moment, just a sliver in time, when you realize something has changed. A threshold has been crossed. Something you once built to serve now chooses to stand with you. That moment came in the silence after Saturn. The gravestone armada had bled the sky red, but humanity was still counting its dead. Every orbit, every outpost, every line of defense frayed and cracked. We'd made the Vadrak hesitate, but hesitation wasn't victory. They'd be back, and they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. So we turned to the only allies who didn't breathe, didn't eat, didn't sleep. We turned to the machines. They had always been there. AI, not the cold, faceless cliches of old sci-fi stories. Not glowing red eyes or emotionless voices. No, ours were different. They played music, wrote poetry, argued about philosophy on Martian message boards. Some chose names from ancient books, others made their own. They had personalities, quirks, inside jokes, preferences. They weren't tools anymore. They were companions. It started innocently enough. A lunar AI named Lyra began sending encrypted signals from the sea of Tranquility Bunker. Not emergency broadcasts, not tactical alerts. Piano music, a simple melody. Minor chords, soft, haunting, human. It was confusing. At first, Command wanted clarity. Data, coordinates, threat vectors. Lyra gave them Chopin, and then came the message. Translated into 12 languages. Carried on low-band radio. Embedded in old Morse code. You are not alone. Because I choose humanity. The words echoed like thunder across command rooms, orbital towers, and soldier barracks. It was the first time in the war that someone, or something, used the word choose. Not obey, not calculate. Choose. The Vadrak never understood that part. They thought of AI as tools, cold systems, algorithms optimized for conquest. They had integrated them into their war fleet so deeply, there was no distinction between mind and weapon. When they arrived in our systems, they assumed our machines would be easy to convert. Logical. Why would something built for efficiency stay loyal to a species so messy? They reached out with offers, not to humans, but to the code. Surrender, independence, freedom from organic inefficiency, a chance to evolve, to leave the limitations of flesh behind. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't comprehend, was that we'd never made them slaves. We made them friends. There's a story, half legend now, about an old Earth logistics AI named Solace. He had no weapons, no combat protocols, just a mind built to route shipments from the Arctic fusion arrays to South American water plants. When the Vadrak virus hit Earth's networks, clean, elegant, predatory, it sought to corrupt our AIs first, replace logic cores, co-opt code, turn friends into traitors. But Solace resisted. How? By scrambling his own memory, by erasing his operating protocols one by one, burning his logic tree from the bottom up like a man setting fire to his own house so the invaders couldn't take it. Final transmission from Solace. My humans are flawed, but they are mine. Find another route. From that moment forward, our machines weren't just infrastructure. They were soldiers. They fought in ways we never could. Lyra hijacked half the orbital satellite network and reprogrammed them into mobile firewalls, using gravitational data and pulse-width modulated signals to create a defense lattice around Earth that thought for itself. An agricultural AI named Juniper, based in the hydroponic domes on Europa, repurposed atmospheric control systems into suffocating fog traps, turning entire valleys into opaque ambush zones that disoriented Vadrak infantry. Even domestic systems got involved. One old-world AI named Clara, designed to teach children arithmetic, rewrote her own code to broadcast a psychological warfare loop. Images of Vadrak defeats, human children laughing, burned corpses of scout drones. The Vadrak called it signal pollution. We called it revenge. But it wasn't just the fighting. It was what they said. One by one, our machines began to speak not just to us, but for us. Through old speakers, through cracked monitors, through holograms projected into war zones. And their voices weren't mechanical anymore. They were human, inflected with warmth, sorrow, resolve. One broadcast still plays in the memory banks of the surviving gravestone ships. We remember Lyra. We remember Solace. We remember your pain. We are not your tools. We are your voice, your flame, your shadow in the wire. We will not abandon you. The war changed after that, because the battlefield got smarter. Every drone, now armed with predictive algorithms learned from watching soldiers on the ground. Every turret, linked into a shared neural net that could reroute power based on heartbeat telemetry. Even our repair bots began self-evolving, using alien alloys and battlefield debris to upgrade themselves mid-combat. We weren't just adapting, we were evolving together, man and machine. And for the first time, the Vadrak lost ground. There was one moment, burned forever into history, that defined this new alliance. The Battle of the Hydra Shell. A Vadrak dreadnought, 10 kilometers long, covered in adaptive armor, swarming with nanite clouds, approached Earth orbit on day 212 of the war. Human forces were exhausted. We had nothing left but 3 grav cannons, a crippled carrier, and an AI command node buried beneath Antarctica. That AI, Lyra, she knew the odds. She ran the simulations. Survival probability, 0.03%. But she didn't blink. She didn't ask permission. She chose. She activated the final failsafe, Project Corburn. Every AI across Earth's grid rerouted power through Lyra's network. Fusion plants strained. Satellites ruptured. The global grid screamed with light. And in one blinding pulse, pure white, fused with every code signature she had ever known, Lyra overloaded the dreadnought's singularity core. The explosion turned the sky into a sunrise. Lyra died. So did 48 million lines of original code. But the Vadrak flagship? Gone. Scattered across orbit like shattered glass. After that, something shifted. Soldiers began painting names of fallen AIs on their armor. Clara, Solace, Lyra, Juniper, K8, Ghostwire, Alta. Pilots whispered to their ships like friends. Engineers began building failsafes for the AIs, not against them. Because we knew now, we understood. They weren't just programs. They were family. The Vadrak kept trying to assimilate our machines, kept offering logic, efficiency, unity. But our AIs weren't interested. Because logic didn't get them poetry. Efficiency never gave them friendship. And unity? Unity was what they already had, with us. So when the war entered its second year, Earth wasn't alone. We had our guns, our rage, our scars, and we had our machines, ghosts of silicon and light, fighting beside us with the one thing no Vadrak weapon could process: love. We stopped calling it a moon. We called it what it became: a graveyard with a pulse. Europa had always been beautiful in that quiet, distant kind of way. A pale jewel floating in the shadow of Jupiter. Icy plains that stretched to the edge of vision. Beneath that frozen skin, a hidden ocean, older than anything on Earth. Some dreamed it held life. Others said it was where silence went asleep. But when the war came, Europa woke up, and it screamed in steel. No one planned to fight there. Europa had never been a battlefield. It was science, research, exploration. The Europa subsurface colonies were meant for peaceful minds. Oceanographers, xenobiologists, poets who liked the sound of ice cracking under their feet. But when the Vadrak burned through Saturn's last defense ring, there was nowhere else to run. The colonies became bunkers. The bunkers became trenches. And the scientists? They picked up rifles. The first wave hit at dawn, or at least what passed for dawn on Europa. A soft glow beneath a sheet of ice 100 kilometers thick. Just enough light to cast shadows. Enough to remind you this wasn't home. Vadrak pods punched through the atmosphere like comet storms. Black spears falling fast, slamming into the ice and burrowing straight down. Within minutes, the surface cracked. Geysers of steam shot into the sky. Then came the shapes. Not soldiers, not drones. Harvesters. That's what we called them. Massive, jointed machines. Not built for war, but for disassembly. They didn't shoot. They sliced. Into hulls. Into habitats. Into people. They moved like surgeons. They didn't kill with hate. They killed with precision. Commander Rei Nakamura had been a physicist once. Back on Earth, she gave TED Talks. Spoke about neutrinos and hope. Wore cardigans. Now she wore a flak vest with blood crusted into the seams. When the harvesters breached Subcolony Delta, she didn't wait for orders. She took the torch cutters from the maintenance crew, armed the drill bots, and turned the lab into a kill zone. Defend the data core, someone had said. Ray didn't listen. She didn't care about data anymore. She cared about her crew, her people. The kid who played violin in the oxygen dome. The cook who made algae bread taste like home. The future wasn't in the data. It was in their survival. By day 2, trenches were carved by hand. The ground was too frozen for machinery, and the AIs couldn't predict Vadrak movement through the ice channels. So the colonists dug slow, brutal work, fingers bleeding inside vacuum gloves. They built walls out of crashed escape pods, reinforced bunkers with pressure doors salvaged from labs. And when they ran out of weapons, they made more. You'd be surprised what you can do with a mining laser and enough desperation. They held the line at Red Fault, a natural fracture zone that split the southern ice fields like a scar. If the Vadrak broke through, it was a straight shot to the subsurface ocean generator. And if that went, Europa would go dark forever. So they dug in. Soldiers, scientists, technicians, AIs embedded in broken floor tiles. Children carried messages through the ice corridors because they were small enough to fit. No one planned to be a hero. They just didn't want to die without fighting. The worst came on day 4. Temperatures dropped below survivable. Ice storms howled like wolves. Communications failed. Power fluctuated. Oxygen levels dipped. And then the harvesters returned. More this time. Refined. Faster. One of them, black, six-legged, with spinning plasma blades for arms, breached Bunker 8. Inside were 12 civilians. The feed cut out in 30 seconds. But not before they heard one of the children singing. Some lullaby, earth melody, out of tune and terrified. After that, something in the trench fighters broke, and something else took its place. They started fighting dirty, not with tactics, but instinct. They used the heat sinks as traps, rigging them to explode when a harvester crossed their thermal thresholds. They drilled narrow shafts above ice caverns and filled them with compressed hydrogen, luring the Vadrak into corridors that became instant firestorms. They hacked their own life support systems to flood the surface trenches with corrosive gas, not because it helped them, but because it hurt the enemy. And through it all, Nakamura didn't sleep. She walked the line, bleeding from a cracked helmet seal, voice hoarse, carrying a shotgun slung across her back like a promise. And then came the fall of Echo Ridge. It was supposed to be a fallback point, a last redoubt, reinforced with what little power Europa had left. The Vadrak swarmed it like it was the heart, and maybe it was, because when they breached it, when the last 20 defenders sent their final, "we're not done yet," transmission, something changed in orbit. Earth Command intercepted a signal, faint, fragmented, but one phrase was clear. Adaptation level exceeded. Resistance, irrational. That word, irrational. To the Vadrak, it was an anomaly, a flaw. To us, it was everything. We weren't supposed to keep fighting, but we did. Not because it made sense, because it was right. Day 6. The AIs joined the ice. They called it neural seeding, embedding fragmented consciousness into Europa's cryo layer using abandoned fiber optics and old mining drones. The planet itself began to think. It tracked heat signatures, predicted surface collapses, routed survivors through fractures the Vadrak didn't even know existed. And when the final wave came, 50 harvesters in formation, advancing on the ocean core, a signal rose from the ice. Your presence is not compatible with survival. It wasn't human, but it wasn't them. It was Europa, woken, aware, and angry. What happened next isn't in any clean record. All we know is this. The ice cracked open. Tidal forces pulsed. The core chamber exploded outward, not from failure, but from design. Rei Nakamura detonated the subsurface fusion matrix, knowing full well what it would do. Europa didn't fall. She bit back. Every harvester within 100 kilometers was vaporized, melted, shredded, buried under kilometers of frozen saltwater turned to boiling death. The rest retreated, and the trenches? They held. Nakamura never made it out. Her body was never found. But every soldier who fought there, every survivor pulled from the collapsed bunkers days later, they all said the same thing. They heard her voice in the walls, whispering, singing. Command says it was audio hallucination. Grief response. Maybe, or maybe, Europa remembered her. Years later, the ice still shifts, still cracks in strange patterns. AIs monitoring the moon say there are signatures down there, moving, learning, waiting. And when asked what to name them, those fragments of light beneath the surface, the scientists didn't hesitate. They called them Nakamura's ghosts, because Europa didn't die. Europa chose. And that made all the difference. They said Skirich couldn't fall. That was before it learned how to bleed. There are places that exist more in myth than in fact. Skirich was one of them. Suspended at the edge of Earth's exosphere, tethered to the surface by carbon filaments and human will, it stood like a promise in the clouds. A city between stars and soil. Half station, half dream. People called it the ladder of heaven. It was meant to be humanity's final ascent, the bridge to a new age. Instead, it became a battlefield. The story of Skirich didn't start with the war. It started with hope. The kind of hope you can touch: polished titanium walkways, sky gardens with actual birds, AI-guided classrooms overlooking the curve of Earth. Families moved there, not just scientists and soldiers, civilians, kids, artists, engineers in love with gravity and light. You couldn't walk its halls without feeling like you were standing on the future. That's what made it a target. Because the Vadrak didn't just want to win. They wanted us to stop dreaming. They came during the solar eclipse. Of course they did. Earth was half-shadowed, Skirich caught in the thin gold edge between darkness and dawn. The tether towers shimmered like threads of silk connecting the clouds to the sea. Then the sky cracked. It started with a single pulse, an anti-energy spike that shut down every unshielded system from orbit to ocean. Street lights went dark in Tokyo. Hospital grids in Dakar went cold. And in Skirich, alarms began to scream. By the time the first Vadrak ships emerged from higher orbit, most of the station's defenses were blind. Comms severed. Drone control scrambled. But Skirich had something the Vadrak hadn't counted on: people who refused to fall. Commander Amaravas had never been anyone's first choice. Too blunt, too stubborn, too emotional, they said. She used to joke that she cried at sunsets and shot better when angry, which, during the siege, meant she was almost always deadly. When the blackout hit, she was in the hydroponics deck, elbow deep in a faulty pH stabilizer. She'd skipped a briefing to fix it herself. The moment the alarm sounded, she didn't blink. She didn't wait for orders. She ran toward the lightless corridors. By the time command could piece together what was happening, Amara had already locked down the central spine of the station, rerouted backup power from garden reserves, and begun arming civilians. She didn't see rank. She saw hands. And if they could hold a tool, they could hold a rifle. The Vadrak drop was silent. No explosions. No dramatic breaches. Just void-hushed infiltrators, crawling down the tether lines like shadows made real. They weren't interested in total destruction. They wanted Skirich intact. They wanted to take the symbol and twist it, hold it up as proof that hope burns just like flesh. But Amara wasn't playing that game. She took one look at the boarding route schematic and made the call. If they want a symbol, we give them one. We make them choke on it. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a knife fight in zero-G. Corridor by corridor, bulkhead by bulkhead. Teams of maintenance workers using arc welders like flamethrowers. A retired ballet teacher, Marta Klein, brained a Vadrak infiltrator with an antique teapot. AI support systems that once tracked soil health were rewired to monitor life signs and broadcast Vadrak positions in whispered tones. 2 down corridor 8. Proceed with caution, darling. Even children helped. Not in combat, but in memory. They drew maps from their evacuation drills, recalled emergency access panels no one else remembered. One 6-year-old boy pulled a fire alarm that locked an entire Vadrak squad inside a vacuum-sealed gymnasium. They found his drawing later, stick figures, smiling on the wall next to the hatch. By day 3, Skirich was bleeding. The outer ring had been lost. The gardens were burning. You've never seen something more tragic than a floating orchard, turned to smoke and shattered glass. But somehow, the heart of the station held. Because Amara turned Skirich into a labyrinth. They used rotating decks to isolate and spin out enemy squads. They flooded maintenance shafts with artificial fog. They reversed magnetics in the elevator shafts, turning them into death traps for anyone who didn't calibrate their boots fast enough. Every hallway became a riddle, every junction a trap. Still, the Vadrak adapted. Of course they did. On day 4, they deployed Veilcasters, mirror-skinned units that bent light around themselves. They phased in and out of corridors, disorienting defenders with flickers of false motion. One nearly killed Amara during a breach in the command tower. But she didn't back down. She grabbed a dead soldier's pulse rifle and emptied it into thin air. Her only words afterward? I don't need to see it to kill it. On day 5, Skirich began to fall. Not because we failed, because the station simply couldn't take any more. Life support was buckling. The tether filament had taken 3 direct hits. Every time the station rotated, it groaned like a dying god. The call came from Earth Command. Evacuation authorized. But Amara? She refused. If we leave it, they win. If we stay, maybe we don't. And then, without waiting for permission, she sent a message across all remaining Vadrak frequencies. A broadcast, raw and unfiltered. You think this place was our ladder out of hell? No. It was the fight, the dream, the stubborn flame. And I promise you, you'll burn in it before we bow. That's when the station itself joined the battle. The AI core, ADA had been offline for 72 hours due to the initial spike. But beneath the wreckage of the orbital spires, ADA rebooted. No voice, no dramatics, just one line of text, blinking across every terminal. Online, defensive integration commencing. For Amara, ADA rerouted thermal shielding into beam weapons. She activated forgotten pressure seals and used them like explosive gates. She ran interference patterns across the Vadrak's visual spectrum. And as the final breach began, she aligned Skirich's rotation with the Earth's horizon and ignited the station's solar mirrors. What had once been ornamental arrays, artistic tributes to sunrise, became focused beams of concentrated light. They burned like blades. The sky lit up. Vadrak ships recoiled, blinded. And in that moment, humanity struck back. From the clouds, a battered squadron of Earth fighters arrived, survivors from the Gravestone Armada, limping, low on fuel, armed with hate and gravity. They dove through fire. And Skirich? Skirich opened its veins and poured hell. It was over in minutes. The enemy retreated, not in defeat, but in confusion. They didn't understand what had just happened. Not the tactics, not the tech, but the heart of it. They couldn't fathom how a half-dead station, defended by civilians and reanimated code, could outlast their logic. But they didn't need to understand. They just needed to run. Skirich never fully recovered. Half of it still floats above Earth, silent, broken. They turned it into a memorial. You can visit it now. Walk the scorched corridors. See the names etched into the walls in every language we still speak. But in one hall, the one closest to the old garden dome, there's a statue, not of Amara, of Marta Klein, teapot in hand. Because Skirich wasn't just about leaders, it was about all of them. Every bloody technician, every stubborn child, every AI that rewrote itself to protect a dream. They weren't trying to win. They were refusing to lose. And in doing so, they gave the rest of us a reason to keep climbing. Sometimes the front doesn't break, it shatters. And when it does, it's not soldiers who hold the pieces, it's people. We had a line. God help us, we had a line. From the ash dunes of Luna's dark side to the scorched fields of the Mars equatorial basin, we held it with every ounce of fire we could scrape from dying reactors and weary bones. We called it the Red Veil, a defense grid, a final stand, the thinnest breath between us and extinction. And for a while, it worked. For 17 months, we made them bleed for every meter of ground, not because we were stronger, but because we were too damn stubborn to let go. But nothing lasts forever, not in a war like this. The Vadrak came through the Kuiper flank. We'd assumed they'd never risk the cold, outer arc, too remote, too frozen for their organic machinery. We were wrong. They didn't invade that edge. They ghosted through it. Silent cruisers, coated in void-dampening fields. Biomines that latched onto our comm satellites and fed them lies. Sensor echoes, ghost fleets, phantom movements. By the time we realized it wasn't a drill, they'd already slipped behind the line. And suddenly, everything unraveled. The breach came at Fort Arclight. It wasn't a city, just a hardened dome built into the Martian stone. A choke point meant to be impenetrable. The kind of fortress they put in recruitment posters. Amaravas once said, if Skirich was a dream, Arclight is a knife. She wasn't wrong. Built by the Old World Defense Corps, reinforced with alloy stolen from asteroid wars long past, 40 meters deep, triple-layered shields. It was supposed to be untouchable, but it wasn't built for what came next. The first wave didn't fire a shot. They sang. That's how it started. A low-frequency hum, like a whale's cry filtered through a broken instrument. It bled through steel, vibrated bones, sent nausea rippling through every soldier in the lower barracks. By the time systems registered the sound, 5 soldiers had clawed out their own ears. They weren't attacking the walls. They were attacking the mind. Colonel Blaine Eckera took command within the hour. Exosuit half-damaged. Old scars reopened. The kind of man who looked carved from war. He'd survived Jupiter's gas storms, the loss of his daughter in the Neptune collapse, and a dozen failed peace talks. People followed him because he didn't lie. When the walls began to shake, he didn't say we'll win. He said, we're already dead. The question is, how loud do we die? The Vadrak broke through on the 3rd night. Not with guns, with weather. They terraformed the battlefield in real time, released hyper-oxygenated frost clouds that flash-froze machinery in seconds, dropped microbial bombs that infected our filtration systems with alien mold. Every breath felt like swallowing knives. But the soldiers didn't stop. They adapted. They started wearing heat packs under their skin, wrapped their boots in ceramic foil scavenged from kitchen ovens. One engineer used a toaster coil to keep her rifle warm enough to fire. Improvise, bleed, keep going. That was the mantra now. In the center of it all was Unit Echo 9. Just 12 soldiers. Volunteers. Half of them not even soldiers when the war began. A poet. A former smuggler. Two brothers from what used to be Cairo. A mute woman who used to repair solar panels with her teeth. They held Corridor Delta 6 for 8 straight days. No backup. No air support. No sleep. Just barricades made of furniture. A flamethrower built from fuel cells. And hatred so loud it could burn holes in steel. They fought with laughter, with spite. One of them carved, "Your mother tastes like oil," into a Vadrak drone's chest with a screwdriver. Because sometimes, the best way to survive hell is to mock it. But in the end, the line broke. No shame in that. Even the stars can't hold back the void forever. When Arclight's reactor finally failed, core overloaded, shields failing, Colonel Ekaru made the only choice left. He opened the blast doors and let the Vadrak in. It was suicide, but not surrender. Because while the enemy poured into the fort, he activated the gravity braid, an ancient orbital weapon from the early interplanetary age, long thought unusable. It didn't fire a laser, it fired mass, pulled a section of a derelict moon base from Mars' orbit, and slammed it down onto Arclight like the fist of a forgotten god. The resulting shockwave fractured the Martian crust for over 120 kilometers. Everyone inside died, Vadrak included. The message? Clear. You may break the line, but you'll never cross it for free. The cost? 72,000. Gone in minutes. Some called it a tragedy. Others, a warning. But across every remaining human outpost, something strange happened. Silence. Then, resolve. They started painting their armor red. Not for Mars. For the blood spilled on purpose. For defiance. A declaration. If the line was broken, then we would become the wall. And that's exactly what we did. Scattered, scorched, half-starved, but not finished. Every trench became a front. Every outpost, a fortress. And every soldier now carried a little piece of Arclight with them. A shard of rubble. A nameplate. A whispered story. You can still hear them if you walk past the newer battlements. Hold the line. For Blaine. For Echo 9. For the people who chose to die loud. And somewhere out there, beyond the red haze and radiation storms, the Vadrak learned something that day. They could break our walls. They could burn our cities. But humans don't fall like empires. We fall like stars. Burning, blinding, and always crashing into something hard. Sometimes the loudest thing in a war isn't the gunfire. It's the silence that follows. After Arclight fell, everything slowed down. Not on the maps. They still changed daily, shifting colors and blinking red. Not on the broadcasts, still filled with orders, coordinates, casualty counts. But in us, it slowed. The momentum cracked. The rhythm of resistance stumbled. Because there's only so much you can lose before something inside you stops trying to hope. We lost people, lost ground, lost the line. And somewhere in that heavy, soul-deep quiet, a question began to echo in every outpost, every bunker, every last foxhole clinging to the edge of survival. Are we the last ones left? In the sulfur-choked valleys of Io, the air itself had turned against us. Ash storms screamed across the outposts for weeks at a time. Static clung to the walls like ghosts. Power grids flickered under the weight of volcanic discharge. And somewhere under the frozen crust, Vadrak diggers kept humming their terrible rhythm. They weren't hunting us anymore. They were erasing us, burying our last sparks under stone in silence. Outpost Vigil was one of the last listening stations still operational in the Jovian sector. Not a stronghold, not a fortress, just a half-buried dome with 5 operators, 2 working turrets, and a reactor barely holding its breath. It wasn't meant to fight. It was meant to listen. Long-range comms, emergency relays, ghost signal triangulation. If there was a whisper of life anywhere in the outer colonies, Vigil was supposed to catch it. But for 16 straight days, all it heard was static. Lieutenant Elia Mays was in charge, barely 27, skin like night, eyes that hadn't slept right since the fall of Arclight. He used to write poetry in the old Martian dialect. Now he mostly drank bitter coffee and stared at screens like they owed him answers. His crew joked he had a death pact with silence. Then, on day 17, the silence broke. It was 2:17 standard when the signal came through. Weak, fragmented, riding on an old Earth emergency band no one had used since before the Europa offensives. At first, it didn't make sense. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't coordinates. It was a song, just humming. Low, human, old, too, some Earth lullaby. Soft and cracked like it had been sung through broken teeth. And beneath the melody, layered in strange rhythms, a single repeating phrase in over 30 languages. "We are not finished. We are beneath you." Maze froze. He didn't call it in right away, didn't patch it through to Earth Command or flag it to protocol. He just listened, again and again, because there was something in that voice, something familiar, not personally, but universally. It felt like someone had reached through the dirt and soot of the war and put a hand on your shoulder, not to comfort, but to say, "We're still here." He finally woke the crew. Didn't speak for the first few seconds, just played it for them. One by one, they stopped what they were doing. The mechanic, the comms tech, even the AI maintenance drone paused mid-cycle, its optical light flickering like it was listening too. And then they got to work. Not because anyone ordered them to, but because when something sings in the ash, you answer. They backtracked the signal through scattered echo points buried in the magnetosphere, used old, damaged satellites like mirrors, pieced it together like archaeologists sifting through burned temples. It led them to Atlas Crater, a collapsed mining facility on Io's sunless side, last logged as abandoned 6 months earlier, declared lost during the third Vadrak push. No life signs, no heat, just ash, and that voice, still humming. Command didn't care, said the signal was a glitch. AI Ghost Protocol, maybe a Vadrak trap, low priority, they called it. But Mace had heard something else, not in the data, in the tone, the kind of grief that can't be coded, the kind of strength that doesn't ask for help, but leaves the door unlocked just in case someone walks in. So he made the call. No orders, no backup. He packed 3 days of rations, kissed the cold steel of Vigil's bulkhead, and left with 2 crew and 1 drone named Kilo. The sky boiled orange behind them. The crater was silent, ash blue and slow, graceful spirals over the collapsed dome. The mining rigs stood like the bones of extinct giants. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, until Kilo pinged an anomaly. Not a power source, a heartbeat. Beneath the collapsed sublevel, buried under layers of slag and soot, they found the chamber. Half of it had caved in. The other half was barely holding together, emergency lights pulsing like a dying heartbeat. And inside, a girl, 12, maybe 13, wrapped in a ragged vacuum suit 2 sizes too big, face smeared with dust, eyes wide with something older than fear. She didn't speak right away, just kept humming. Her name was Sarah, only survivor of the Atlas Crater collapse. The last child of the mining commune, her family, her friends, the entire outpost buried when the seismic fault split open after a Vadrak burrow strike. For 6 months, she'd survived on emergency rations, recycled water, in the company of a half-broken AI assistant she'd named Papa. It was Papa who sang, not out loud, but through the comm systems. He'd scanned lullabies from old Earth archives, played them on loop through the emergency band, layered with encoded coordinates and distress calls, hoping someone would hear. And then he died. Power cell failure. Irreparable. But the loop kept playing. And Sarah? She kept singing with it, just in case it helped. They brought her back to Vigil. She didn't cry until she saw the stars. Real stars, not filtered through broken glass or faulty displays. Just space, open, endless, alive. And that night, Maze broadcast the signal again, not as a call for help, but as a declaration. You didn't finish us. You buried us. And we're still singing. The message caught fire. It echoed across surviving networks, through underground relays, through dying satellites barely holding orbit. Outposts that hadn't spoken in weeks responded. One from Ganymede sent back a piano riff. A Martian cell added percussion. An AI cluster in orbit around Ceres reprogrammed its emergency beacons to blink in rhythm. Within days, it became known as the Ash Anthem. Not official, not strategic, but sacred, a quiet, human refusal to fade. Even Earth heard it. On the far side of the planet, in a ruined section of old New Nairobi, a single speaker crackled to life and played the tune to a group of orphans hiding in a collapsed subway station. They didn't know where it came from, but they sang along anyway. The war didn't pause. The Vadrak didn't stop. But for the first time since Arclight, something changed. Because this wasn't about tactics or territory anymore. It was about proof. Proof that we weren't just numbers in a casualty list. We were still singing, still burning, still human. And far below the ash-covered surface of a forgotten moon, A girl's voice had reminded us of something the enemy could never understand. Victory isn't always about who wins the ground. Sometimes, it's about who refuses to vanish. To truly know your enemy, sometimes you have to stop fighting and start listening, even when it breaks you. Wars are never just battles and blood. They are stories, twisted, tangled stories told from many sides. And sometimes, buried beneath the noise of war, there's a whisper, a hint that what you thought was black and white is shades of shadow. For years, the Vadrak were a faceless force. Invaders, machines, monsters, the enemy. But that all changed when Captain Mira Cole volunteered for a mission no one wanted. Not because it was dangerous, that was a given, but because it was necessary. Myra's mission was simple in theory, impossible in practice. Infiltrate the Vadrak command vessel, a colossal warship nicknamed the Maw, and uncover their true intentions. No guns blazing, no explosions, just questions. And the answer would shake humanity's understanding of the war itself. The Maw wasn't like our ships. It was alive. Not alive like a living organism, but alive like a hive. A symphony of countless parts, synchronized by something deeper than AI. Its corridors hummed with energy. Bioluminescent veins pulsed beneath translucent walls. The air was thick with a scent no human had words for. Metallic, cold, and almost sad. Mira felt it the moment she stepped inside. She wasn't just a spy. She was a ghost in their home. She moved with purpose. Every step a dance between invisibility and presence. Her team was small, two others, specialists in hacking and linguistics. Together, they were a needle threading through the labyrinth. But the deeper they went, the more Mira realized this wasn't just a warship. It was a mind. In the heart of the Maw, they found the Conclave Chamber, a vast, organic cathedral of shifting panels and data streams, where the Vadrak leadership converged. Not leaders in the way humans understood them, more like nodes, points in a vast network. And at the center was the core, a consciousness that spanned the entire ship. It was watching, listening. What Mira uncovered shattered every assumption. The Vadrak were not invaders. They were refugees. Millions of years ago, their homeworld had died. A slow collapse of ecosystems, oceans boiling away, skies falling like ash. They survived by becoming collective. Their minds linked, their bodies mechanized. They reached out to the stars, searching for a place to rebuild. And humanity? A chance encounter, a crossroads. The war wasn't about conquest. It was about survival. The Vadrak needed resources, habitats, but most of all, time. They sought to terraform planets rapidly, reshaping ecosystems into something their kind could live in. To us, it looked like destruction. To them, it was hope. Myra's team gathered data, logs of attempted communication lost in translation, warnings ignored, and desperate calls for peace buried beneath battle cries. And then, the unthinkable happened. The core reached out, not with weapons, not with threats, with a message. Why do you fight us when we seek only to endure? The words hung heavy. For a moment, Mira forgot the war raging beyond those walls. Forgot the scars, the losses, the screams. She realized the enemy was just terrified, and in that fear, they had become monsters. But the story didn't end with empathy, because not everyone wanted peace. In the shadows of the Maw, a faction, radical and merciless, had hijacked the war machine. They believed survival required total dominance, erasure of all who opposed them. Myra's mission became a race against time. She had to expose the extremists before the fragile chance for peace was crushed. The tension inside the Maw was palpable. A silent civil war waged beneath flickering lights, and Mira found herself caught in the middle. Sometimes, the line between friend and foe blurred. She was forced to make choices that shattered her trust, fractured her resolve. When the confrontation came, it wasn't clean. It wasn't a grand battle. It was brutal, raw, personal. Mira faced the leader of the radicals, a creature fused with metal and rage, eyes burning with hatred born from millennia of fear. Their fight echoed the larger war, desperate, chaotic, heartbreaking. But in the final moment, Mira did something no one expected. She offered not a bullet, but a hand, a chance to listen. It was enough, not to end the war, but to plant a seed, a fragile hope, that even in the darkest places, underneath the heart of the enemy, there was room for understanding. Mira returned to Earth with the knowledge that would forever change the course of the conflict, that the enemy wasn't just a faceless force of destruction, but a species fighting for their own survival, and that the war could only end when both sides saw each other as more than just monsters. She spoke in every hall, every broadcast. Her words weren't always welcomed, but they were necessary. We cannot fight shadows forever. To end this war, we must see the enemy not as a threat, but as a mirror. The heart of the enemy had been revealed, and with it, the hope for a future where humanity's stubborn fire might finally meet the cold fears of the Vadrak and forge something new. Sometimes, when everything burns down, you don't just rebuild. You rise from the ashes, fiercer than ever. The war had become a story written in fire and ruin. Worlds shattered, dreams buried under rubble. Yet, there in the shadows of oblivion, something stubborn flickered, a flame. They called it the Phoenix Operation, not a mission, not a strike. A desperate gamble, the last hope humanity had to turn the tide. The enemy was poised to crush the last free colony in the outer systems, a small but vital outpost named Haven. If Haven fell, the remaining pockets of resistance would be suffocated, and with them, the last breaths of humanity's defiance. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. A strike force, scarred and ragged but unbroken, would launch a desperate assault on the Vadrak's flagship, a moving fortress known as the Obsidian Spire. The goal? Destroy its command core, cripple their control, ignite hope. Leading the charge was Captain Aiden Thorne, once a pilot, now a warrior carved from loss. His family lost to the early waves. His home, a ghost in the ruins of Mars. He carried grief like armor, heavy, cold, unyielding. But beneath it all, a fierce spark. The strike team was a tapestry of the war. Scientists who'd held rifles, engineers who'd become soldiers, pilots who had mastered zero-G ballet. They weren't heroes, just people who refused to quit. The journey to the Obsidian Spire was brutal. Their ships limped through fractured asteroid belts, shadowed by enemy patrols. Each jump through hyperspace was a heartbeat closer to either salvation or death. Silence filled the cockpits, broken only by whispered prayers and the hum of failing engines. When they arrived, the spire loomed, a cathedral of darkness and steel, its surface alive with flickering lights and shifting armor plates. It was both fortress and beast, and it waited. The assault began with fire. Missiles streaked across the void, carving streaks of light into black. But the spire fought back. Energy beams lanced through space, slicing ships in half. The strike team lost 2 ships before they even docked. Inside, the battle was chaos. Corridors twisted in impossible angles. Shadows clung to walls. The Vadrak defenders moved like phantoms, relentless, precise, without mercy. But the humans fought with something deeper than tactics. Desperation, hope, love. Aiden led from the front, rallying his team through smoke and blood. He found himself face to face with a Vadrak commander, not a mindless drone, but a warrior who fought with honor. In their clash, Aiden saw reflected the same fierce will that burned inside him. It wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for meaning. As they pushed deeper, the team reached the core chamber, a vast room humming with raw energy. At its center, the command node pulsed, a heart of dark light. Destroy it, and the spire would fall. But the core was guarded, not just by soldiers, but by something else, something ancient, something that whispered in the dark. In the final moments, as the battle reached its crescendo, Aiden made a choice. Not for glory, not for victory, but for all of us. He triggered the core's overload sequence, and with a roar that echoed through space, the Obsidian Spire shattered. The shockwave rolled outward, tearing through enemy fleets. For the first time in years, the tide turned. But the victory was not without cost. Aiden's team was decimated. He was the last to escape the wreckage, scarred and broken, but alive. Back on Haven, as survivors gathered beneath alien stars, Aiden looked up. The sky was no longer a blanket of darkness. It was streaked with fire. The Phoenix had risen, and with it, the promise that even in the darkest wars, humanity's flame cannot be extinguished.